today, in thinking about today's event, I found this very interesting quote, from Albert Einstein. And it says that education is not the learning of facts, but actually the training of the mind to think. And this is where, based on what I've just said, we're thinking about, especially in the cyberspace, knowledge, skills, abilities, and competencies. And when we think of knowledge, we think about the body of information that's applied directly to the performance of a cybersecurity function. When we think of skills, we think about those observable competencies to perform a learned psychomotor act with high accuracy. And we think about ability as that competency to perform an observable act that results in a measurable outcome. And so knowledge, skills, and abilities in terms of your education and as a workforce member, defines what that cybersecurity competency would look like. And so we define competency as the ability to use knowledge, skills, and abilities in addition to the individual's behavior and personal characteristics to perform critical work in cybersecurity. And this is where we also consider the term humans in the loop. Very important is their training, their education, their ability to think critically, their ability to understand the environment within which they work, irrespective of their background, whether it's an education pathway, training, or certification. Today's agenda, I'll focus on introduction to cybersecurity because we acknowledge that we've got a diverse set of individuals, some of whom are new to cybersecurity. Some of you are practitioners yourself, but very important that we understand what is cybersecurity, the importance of cybersecurity, and we'll discuss education in the context of cybersecurity. We'll also go over boot camps and our approach to boot camps, some of the research that I've done, and that's infused across Digital Opportunity, 1G Cyber, and our other partners. And of course, we'll have a questions and answers, which would help inform you as to what a boot camp is, what we offer, and just generally give you enough information for you to make an appropriate decision. And so let's think about it. We're looking at this image here, and I'd like you to take a moment just to observe that image. We think of it from an IoT perspective, but we also think about it from our daily lives. We've got a home in the center there. We've got the computers, we've got devices that are currently connected to the home. But when we think about this image, we also think deeper. We think about the data that's transmitted over these networks, the services that we're using, the availability of those services. We also think about the privacy within which we live. In our home, we have a private accommodation. We think about the consideration of privacy when we use these devices. We also think of security. We've got locks on our doors, windows on our doors. We've got passwords on our devices. Very important. But we also think about several other things. We think about safety, and we also think about surety. In the event that something happens, how secure are our devices? How secure is our home? And so very important that we think about today's environment where we are connected and we're working from home as a result of the pandemic. And so our organization and its data is also part of our home. We also think about the organization from the perspective of its enterprise infrastructure now extends into our home, apart from those critical infrastructure that support our personal activities. And so very important that we think about it, whether it's a single individual, we think of a building, we think about a community, we think about a city, we think about the criticality of maintaining those services that are very important to us. And so it brings us to the question, what is cybersecurity and why do we need it? And so let's think about it from the perspective of protection. Very bold statement, cybersecurity is protection. Protection from what? Protection of our critical assets from threat actors. We think of those critical assets that support society, support our daily lives. And of course, we think about the impact, and a classic example would be our GPS. What would happen if our GPS stopped working? What would happen if our internet stopped working? What would happen if our critical infrastructure, such as electricity, stopped working? And the ripple effects that it would have on society and our daily lives. And so we also think about it from the perspective of those who will harm us intentionally or otherwise, or what would be the measures of performance that they would gain from that. And so in thinking of cybersecurity, very important that we consider data. We consider people, the practices, whether it's within an organization, whether it's within society. We think about the processes, and there's so many that we can start to think about. And we think about the technology that supports our daily lives. And so very important that when we think about cybersecurity as a professional, or as a cybersecurity, as someone who benefits from the service, that we understand that there are people that are involved in these processes and there are technologies that support um, these activities. And so in thinking about cybersecurity, we also must think about it from the perspective of the attack. What will occur if we are attacked? What will occur if there is damage to our data? What will occur if we lose that data? In many cases, especially in our banking systems, we interact with social media, we interact with so many different systems. What would happen if someone abused our access to these systems in the context of a repudiation attack? And in many cases, unauthorized access, what can that person do? And so in looking at the diagram here, we see generally the thinking of a hacker, their intention to abuse, to steal data, the intention of destroying data as a result of vulnerabilities that exist in the technology that we use, and of course, the abuse and sale of that data. If anyone here has gotten their identity stolen, you definitely understand the impact of that. And so the challenges that we may face, whether it's personal or organizational, is damage to reputation or good name. If someone goes on our social media and posts something that's insensitive or that is not characteristic of our behavior. We think about it from a perspective of the crisis, how we feel in terms of behavior and trauma. We also think about it in cost of repairing those damages, right? What's the cost to reputation? What's the cost in terms of our personal satisfaction? We also think about it from a business perspective, the loss of clients, the lack of trust or the loss of trust if we don't have those structures in place. We also think about it as the challenges of restoring all of these losses, the cost of restoring it. And so it's very important that we think of cybersecurity as a public good, that it supports not just our personal privacy, but our organizations and business. And so in accomplishing that, we think about it from three perspectives. And these are three perspectives that interact in many dimensions. We think about it from the perspective of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We want to ensure that what we communicate is secure. We want to ensure that what's communicated is delivered to the intended recipient. We also want to ensure that the integrity is maintained, that what was sent is actually what is actually received. And we also want to ensure that we are able to access these systems at any time. And so in thinking of cybersecurity, information security, there are these three very central pillars: integrity, availability, and confidentiality. We generally refer to it as the CIA triad, or I should say confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But in essence, we think about it across the people, processes, and technologies. And we also think about it in the context of transmitting data, storing data, and manipulating data, irrespective of which types of systems and services we're using. Here, there are several ways of actually approaching a defensive mechanism, several frameworks that exist out there. And within the United States, we've got, and we think of the US as being one of those front runners in cybersecurity education and research. And the NIST cybersecurity framework, the National Institute of Standard and Technology from the US government, provides one methodology of looking at how we protect these systems, how we're able to define functions, which are to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. While I'll not go into these in detail, very important, these 5 functions give us an ability to actually look at our systems, look at our services, and provide measures of situational operational awareness so that we are able to proactively address cybersecurity gaps and of course, reduce the threat actor. And later on, you'll actually see how, as part of our bootcamp approach to cybersecurity, how the cybersecurity framework interacts with our learning, interacts with our defense mechanisms to protect an enterprise infrastructure. Now, why do we need it? Why do we need the cybersecurity? And here is where we'll talk about the challenges that we're facing today. We've been able to observe that over time, whether it's a hack on the DNC, whether it's elections hacking, whether it's most recently in the Caribbean, Jamaica experienced a hack to their immigration services, whether it's in Guyana, where we've got challenges to the banking sector, United States, and so many different places. We saw Twitter being hacked. And so we think about it from the perspective of preventing these cyber crimes and the negative impact that they would have on society. We think about it from fraud and abuse. And there's something that that challenges in cybersecurity, and that's the fraud triangle, right? Where we don't necessarily know the motivation of those who are trying to attack us. But very importantly, we also think about accomplishing preventative mechanisms to reduce or at least limit hacking activities, where we use governance, risk, and compliance mechanisms. From a top-down perspective, we apply regulations and laws. And of course, we establish standards, much like what the United States has established with the NIST framework. And so we think about it from the perspective also of the hacker and their motivations, whether it's someone that sits within our organizations and inside a threat, whether it's someone that sits across the globe with a particular motivations, whether it's financial or otherwise. And so very important that we also consider the access to systems, the protection of our assets, the criticality, sensitivity of our assets, and the control mechanisms that we have in place to reduce the risk. The challenges of being exposed to the internet, and what would be the outcomes if we were to? Do we have the mechanisms to respond? And so very important that we also think about our cybersecurity and our training from the perspective of the hacker, and how do we defend against the hacker. Now, in accomplishing some superior cybersecurity structures, very important that we consider 4 pillars: governance mechanisms, the management, the tools, the processes that we use, the organizational perspective. What are we protecting? What are the sensitivity, criticality of the data that we're using? What services do we provide? Where do we reside within the supply chain of a larger system? What are the strategies that we use to accomplish cybersecurity? Very important when thinking about it from a top-down perspective. But for us as cybersecurity practitioners and professionals, we've also got to think about it from the operational perspective. And we'll go over what an operational perspective looks like from an education perspective and how that's transferred into the organization so that we can maintain these 4 critical pillars. Now, we've spoken about, very quick introduction to cybersecurity, what it is, why we need it, the importance of driving and protecting against fraud and abuse. But we also must realize that, as a professional, we play a very integral role within our cybersecurity environment. We support and use tools to protect our enterprises. And so how do we accomplish and how do we acquire those knowledge, skills, and abilities that I defined earlier? There are several pathways. There's a pathway through certification, there's a pathway through education and training. And what I found is that many students, irrespective of background, as long as they've received that training, has the ability to acquire certification, which provides an attestation to their knowledge, skills, and abilities. In many cases, students who have prior education, whether it's in a technology field or even in a field that's distinct to technology, as long as they apply themselves, they're also able to obtain the same certification, which attests to the same training that someone without a prior education would have. And so when we think about a bootcamp approach, very important, we think about the bootcamp approach of giving students the requisite knowledge, skills, and abilities from the cybersecurity book of knowledge, or body of knowledge, I would say. And when we think about the cybersecurity body of knowledge, it thinks about the cyber environment, the business environment, the enterprise environment from the perspective of being hacked, and of course, from the perspective of defenses. Now, we think about it from the perspective of our security operations and incident management. How do we address vulnerabilities? How do we respond in the event that something occurs? We think about it from the perspective of forensics. How do we have the capabilities to actually investigate a compromise or a breach on the network? And how do we remediate and prevent it from occurring in the future? We also think about it from the perspective of computer network operations, which identify or seek to identify adversarial behavior, whether it's to an organization, whether it's to an entire country. And so we're able to proactively address those challenges, proactively limit their advances against our infrastructure. We also think about it from the perspective of malware attacks on our technologies. And in doing so, we've got to apply the requisite laws, whether it's through international cooperation, whether it's through prosecution within the local sovereign states. We also must encourage privacy of citizens, privacy of personal data, human factors. And we think about human factors as a result of those who use information systems, who protect information systems. And when we think about ourselves as part of this human in the loop, or human factor within the enterprise, we also think about the information system users. We think about the layman on the street using technology in a very normal way. We also think about it from the perspective of critical infrastructure, which is very important. And so we want to ensure that from a body of knowledge perspective, we've got a holistic view of understanding policy, technology, and what education structures are in place to support our critical infrastructure protection. And so very important is that there are several mechanisms across the world that accomplish us defining our workforce. And the NICE Cybersecurity Framework, which is the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, is a NIST framework that supports workforce development. And we think about this framework from the perspective of defining a standard, defining several work roles, providing mechanisms through which to observe the enterprise from a protection mechanisms, in addition to a job duties and job role perspective. And so from a NICE perspective, they've identified 52 work roles across 33 specialty areas, which focus on how do we separate and create processes to support from end-to-end input, process, and output, the protection mechanisms are required. And how do we define the specific work roles that individuals must perform? And in doing so, gives us the ability to actually prepare individuals with those requisite skills to perform those job roles and duties. The challenge here is that cybersecurity work roles from a standard perspective may not translate the same way into an organization, where someone may be able to do multiple tasks that are not defined within the NICE framework. And so we've got, in many cases, in small teams, a meshed environment where an analyst may also be performing some type of engineering activity, some type of leadership activity in some cases. And so how do we ensure that a professional in such a case within that organization has the requisite knowledge, skills, and abilities, in addition to the tools to perform their task, so as to accomplish our protection structures? And these are challenges that we face on a daily basis. Nevertheless, from our approach, we're thinking about a professional from the perspective of understanding what the problem universe is, what the problem environment is, defining those characteristics, and ultimately preparing standardized trainings towards accomplishing the specific needs. And in looking at this particular image here, this is actually from the Cyber Resilience Review, which is a part of the DHS, Department of Homeland Security. And it gives us, it's part of a larger body of knowledge, 10 domains across the CRR. But the training and awareness gives us the ability to actually plan, understand the problem environment, understand the limitations to policies or otherwise, and what technologies are being used. And then how do we plan for training so that the professionals who are operating these systems have the requisite knowledge, skills, and abilities? In our case, we're looking at it from the planning stage, we're looking at it from the assessment stage, and of course, conducting the training. And this is where the boot camps actually come in. How does a boot camp actually accomplish these structures? The challenges that we're looking at is at the end of the bootcamp process, how do we improve training from day one, whether it's across a 2-day training or a 12-week training? How do we move a professional from day one having no prior knowledge, going through the process, the curriculum delivery, the standardized testing, etc., and them leaving at the end of 12 weeks with that requisite skill, and at the same time with a certification that attests that they have developed these new skills. And so the CRR gives us an opportunity to look at these challenges and address them by applying the right structures in a very standardized way. Now, in thinking about applying structures in a standardized way, we also need to think about what exists in the domain and the literature. And here it is that, from my research, I found this very important framework, which is called the Mission Framework. It's a framework that was developed based on research in Dominican Republic, where Dustin and Tavares identified that for us to accomplish holistic structures in our education, we must also consider the technology that we're looking to support, the policies that are existing. And we think with the United States, there are several different ways of looking at it. We've got healthcare and HIPAA. We've got the education industry with their own regulations, the banking and their own regulations. And so in thinking about that, you also think about it from, okay, what technology, then those technologies are distinct: education technology, banking technology. We think about ATM as part of banking. We think about critical infrastructure, right? Or mobile devices. Those are distinct technologies, but they all interact. And so Tavares has developed a framework. And in looking at the education space, boot camps actually support delivering these education mechanisms, understanding what the current challenges are, whether we've got professionals who are already prepared in IT, professionals who are not, what is the extent of our cybersecurity skills gap, and what approaches do we have, which approaches are actually succeeding over others. And so in looking at this framework, it definitely gives us a holistic approach to considering our cybersecurity structures. Another set of challenges, drawing from research here, is influencing factors for cybersecurity education. So while we understand the technology, we understand the cybersecurity skills gap, we understand what policies are in place, we must also understand what is the entire universe within which we exist. And so from a digital opportunity perspective, a 1G cyber perspective, we're looking to train professionals, not just giving you training and saying, yep, you understand the technical skills, but also that you understand the social and technical environments within which you'll be working, within which you're contributing to as a workforce member. And so in defining education, we've got to think about it from these three very important pillars: education, training, and research. Much of what I've just shared a bit of. Influencing factors, and of course, the improvement strategies. And in thinking about education, training, and research, we've got to think about perceptions. Do people want to become cybersecurity professionals? Are there organization structures in place, whether it's within smaller nations, developing nations, or in many cases, the United States, there's a huge skills gap. And so there are organization structures and there are jobs available. There just aren't enough people. So what are the perceptions that are challenging those? What are the challenges to instructions? Are we delivering the appropriate and in-depth knowledge? Are we giving a curriculum that's robust enough that when a professional leaves, they're able to perform these job roles as defined in NICE? And of course, the supply. Do we have people who understand and have got the perception that, hey, if I do pursue cybersecurity education, I have the ability to change my career? And of course, very importantly, the certification, that attestation that says, yes, that while you've acquired the requisite knowledge, skills, and abilities, we've got a secondary authority that could actually attest to that. Influencing factors, of course, ensuring that you've got a number of professionals who support the delivery, specialists, that you've got collaborations. And this is where the team, the CyberBNAP came in, and that we're looking to bring professionals together, both practitioners, professionals, and students, give them the ability to collaborate, the resources, the awareness, and ultimately build that interest to support the supply, support curriculum delivery, and support a robust understanding of the domain. Very important also, as we are looking at it from an operational perspective, is that we've got the requisite policies in place. So we do. We think about it from the United States perspective. They've got the critical infrastructure protection, which started all the way back in 2013. Several different iterations to cybersecurity policy. There are tons of training and there are tons of practitioners out there with the requisite experience. Several programs, whether it's education, certification, or training. Very important that we consider these teams. And by the way, I must acknowledge that CompTIA et al., several authors contributed to this. They've got a very robust paper. But brings us to this very important discussion. And this is where I think we're going to segue a bit from the academia, segue a bit from the history on cybersecurity. So what exactly are we looking to deliver as a bootcamp? We're looking to deliver from the perspective of, yes, there's a huge cybersecurity skills gap. There are also many individuals out there who would like to be trained, would like access to a career, but there are barriers to entry. And many of those barriers are actually cost. And so we're looking to ensure that we provide not just equity, but that we provide the mechanisms through which these individuals can acquire the requisite knowledge, skills, and abilities, pursue cybersecurity jobs or IT jobs, and ultimately contribute in both ways to the protection of organizations, but also improving their financial freedom. And so the bootcamp is one approach, whether you're a career changer, whether you're new to cybersecurity, just unsure of what career path you're going to take, whether you've got financial challenges or otherwise. The bootcamp actually bridge that self-study and ultimately that core education pursuit, in that it reduces the time. It ensures that you acquire the same requisite knowledge and abilities that can be attested by a certification body. And so in thinking about the cybersecurity bootcamps, we're looking at it from the perspective of a tactical approach, an operational approach, and a strategic approach, where in developing the individual, we're looking at introducing them to cybersecurity, taking teams that we just identified there in research in terms of developing the awareness, building a community, and introducing students to the frameworks that exist out there within which they work. Whether they're looking to pursue a career in healthcare, whether they're looking to pursue a career in education, military, they're all different domains of cybersecurity that apply but giving those individuals the requisite knowledge and abilities to perform job duties at a very basic level. We think about it from the operational perspective. Okay, how do we define what an enterprise looks like? How do we give the student the hands-on technology and the hands-on capabilities to actually implement those technology? How do we support them in terms of their self-study? As we mentioned before, the academic rigor, the depth at which bootcamps go into specific topics vary, but ultimately give the students the ability to understand, hey, I can acquire that knowledge from the common body of knowledge. And so from a strategic perspective, we're looking to build their knowledge, the skills, and abilities, but ultimately ensure that they've got this requisite competency that they can actually go in front of a hiring manager and say, yes, I've got the skills, whether I've got the educational background, I've got the certification that tests to my skills, and I'm capable of contributing to your teams. And so, we've come up with a very interesting strategy here, where an introduction to cybersecurity, understanding the history, the challenges, understanding what a bootcamp actually brings, providing that hands-on technology, that psychomotor skill, ensuring that the individual or student understands the enterprise, understands the risk management frameworks that they're applying or they're working under, and ultimately beginning their careers. And it may seem pretty simple, but it actually requires a very in-depth curriculum delivery, which I'll define in a bit. In doing so, in accomplishing these pillars, we're looking to establish it through robust labs, giving students the ability to read. We identify that knowledge, skills, and abilities are very important in preparing a student's competence. Labs, robust labs, reading. A student must read, acquire that knowledge themselves, sharing, collaborating, sharing with their colleagues, hey, this is the way I understood it, but this is the way someone else understands it. This is where the discussions come in. And we look at these cogs, in terms of their sizes, but discussions, having a community of people that actually support and challenge the way in which we think critically about these cybersecurity structures, the way in which we implement labs, the way in which we solve problems, whether it's a knowledge-lean approach or otherwise. Sharing and discussing gives us that ability to understand even better. But from our perspective, we've identified several very critical areas in working towards certification, in preparing the individual with the education, that critical thinking, that reading, that understanding, that deep constructive understanding of the problems, and the training, right? The hands-on skills. We've identified that network administration, systems administration, very important core foundational courses. The cybersecurity framework that we discussed earlier, as an approach to understanding it from that defensive mechanisms, what functions are in place, what do the categories look like, the subcategories, right? And how do they interplay in protecting the organization? We also look at it from the perspective of the threat actor here, because we're doing this in an event that something occurs, and we think we defined cybersecurity earlier, as protection from those threat actors. And we must understand what their motivations are, what their tactics are, and how do we stop them from actually achieving their objectives. And so we apply the risk management frameworks. Very important, we think critically in terms of threat analysis and modeling. And of course, we apply these measures of security orchestration, optimization, and response. We're monitoring our organizations. We are applying our security functions. And we're also looking at it from a holistic perspective. And in delivering our cybersecurity bootcamps, these very important courses here support the delivery. And I'll share with you in a bit what that would look like, all right? Very important to know. And if you've got any questions here, please feel free to make a note. At the end of it, we'll be looking to prepare a final project where the students are applying their network and systems administration skills. They're building out core networks. They're building out miniature enterprise infrastructure. And ultimately, they're testing it. They're looking to see, hey, where did I make mistakes by penetration testing that environment? And so, while we're looking at it from that technical perspective, we're also looking to say, sure, what is the academic rigor when we think about the testing and the verification during this process? Collaboration, at the level of collaboration, the level of community, the practice and hands-on labs, the research that they've done individually, what they've contributed in terms of discussions, what they've learned in terms of discussions from peers, and ultimately giving them the ability to succeed, giving them the tools, the resources, the people within which they can communicate and share with, so that they can succeed. And so this applies to whether it's a student or professional who's already in the field. Very important that we've got a community of people that actually support us. Today we're a system administrator or security analyst, but our intentions are to grow in our career. We think about it from the awareness perspective. We look on LinkedIn, everyone's getting a new certificate, everyone's continuous their cyber education, and even getting the certificates, you've got to maintain them. So you've got to continuously study. And so, it gives us the ability to set these high standards. And so for us at 1G Cyber, Digital Opportunity, we consider this from a holistic perspective in that the student will come through the process, their inputs to the process, the bootcamp curriculum, but they're also outputs into a global workforce where they definitely must contribute to teams and ultimately accomplish the cybersecurity and infrastructure protection that we're looking for. Now, as part of our core program, we've looked at the CompTIA Security Plus Certification. And we've looked at the CompTIA certification as a lighthouse where we're able to say, sure, we're going to build a curriculum that actually gets us to this lighthouse. But that this curriculum also supports, the profession as they go into the workforce. And in looking at the CompTIA curriculum, or the core objectives: monitor and secure, operate and maintain, identify and analyze, respond and assess, which are also core areas within the NICE cybersecurity workforce framework. And for us, in our program, we also looking to align with CompTIA, but at the same time ensure that they've got the requisite skills to actually implement these networks, not just read about it, to secure these systems, that they understand the cyber kill chain activities through penetration testing of the same networks that they've developed, that those networks actually mimic real-world enterprise infrastructure, and that they're able to perform vulnerability mitigation, and that they are able to use tools. Much of what we do in cyber today is actually using tools. Many of the tools out there, through research over time, support, but the tools themselves gives us about a 60% assurance. The human interacts with those tools, which also gives us maybe a 30%. But what occurs within the 10 or so percent that remains, that generally is where a lot of the gaps exist. And that's why we still find that organizations are being hacked with highly secured environments. Now, this is an example of the cybersecurity roadmap. And so while we're targeting the CompTIA Security Plus, if you've observed earlier, we've also got network administration. We also have security or server administration. And so while accomplishing the Security Plus, the student will also be able to write and sit for the Network Plus or the Server Plus certification, which is part of our core courses. While not defined as a core objective, it's one of those secondary objectives in ensuring that the professional has that requisite skill and has the ability to attest to that skill. And I'll share with you in a bit, what the core program looks like, what our curriculum looks like, and ultimately how we can address that from a bootcamp perspective. And so, just highlighting again, we're participating 1G Cyber Digital Opportunity. Cyber providing that environment, that collaborative environment, Champions for Change, on the UK organization focused on youth and youth development. And so our partnership definitely helps accomplish much of what we just discussed. And so in introducing cybersecurity to our students, we're looking first to set these very important pillars: confidentiality, integrity, and availability; cryptographic, maintaining that, these structures through encryption or otherwise; the offensive capabilities or pen testing; understanding what the hackers out there, their tactics, right, their methods; driving risk assessments. Very important team that we work on here: systems dynamics and systems thinking. What are the emergence within the environment within which we work? How do we address that emergence? So how do we provide the requisite situational and operational awareness, which is something that we seldom discuss, right? We heavily focus on, hey, these are the core capabilities, these are the tools that we're using, but how do we understand what the tool does and how it impacts the systems? And of course, very important, the capabilities, networking, and defense in-depth strategies. We also want to ensure that from a learning outcome, that these students are able to analyze problems, solve those problems, apply the cybersecurity body of knowledge, critically think about it from a systems thinking perspective, communicate effectively, right, based on the rich discussions that we provide, design and implement, solutions. And in a bit, we'll take a look at that. Again, highlighting it. Accomplishing these things, they must be robust labs, and of course, tons of discussion to share and also learn. Now, I think this is where I'll spend some time defining what our approach would look like to cybersecurity. And this approach, as much as it may appear very conceptual, has been successful. I've got students who were once working at, let's say, a fast food restaurant, who's now a cybersecurity engineer. I've got students who were in a different field, banking and finance, who are now engineers or who are now analysts. And in thinking about much of what we discussed, the cybersecurity framework on the y-axis, the cyber kill chain on the x-axis there. How do we look at it from a two-dimensional perspective? And of course, right, there are multiple dimensions. But how do we define what our computing environment looks like? How do we give students the abilities to define what their systems look like through a bill of materials? And I'll just give me a second to annotate here. And so we think about it from the perspective of a computing environment. We think about it from the perspective of all the information assets that reside within that environment, whether it's a network device, whether it's a host or endpoint, and of course, what are the risks to these devices? Of course, we're looking to determine knowledge and awareness from that situational perspective, that operational perspective, and how do an individual actively interact with these systems from a systems thinking and systems dynamics perspective. We also think about it from the perspective of training, and that's where we come in, giving the students the requisite knowledge so that they can actually look at such a diagram, look at an enterprise and understand what is my contribution or what is the output of my contribution. And very important, incident response skills, the use of active scanners, analyzing logs, getting notifications. And when we think about these from a conceptual perspective, in our courses, we're actually giving students the ability to create an environment. One, create an identity and access management infrastructure through Active Directory, install the Active Directory, configure the Active Directory, configure the domain controller, add Windows machines to this infrastructure, add Linux machines to this infrastructure, put network systems, whether it's the pfSense firewall or virus router, install them, create new subnets, define the criticality and sensitivity of those subnets, and ultimately scan those networks that they create. And I've got a student, who was very successful in accomplishing this, where we've implemented a school network with over 30 virtual machines, and all of this occurs within a virtual environment. And so that student actually, in practice, installing, configuring, was able to actually demonstrate to a new employer, look, not just do I know how this stuff works, but I can implement it and I can show you I've got this within my system. Here it is. Let's take a look. Let me tell you what I did here. Managing it from a monitoring perspective, where we install Splunk, we install the LStack, we configure the LStack, we install the Elasticsearch. So you build a network from the ground up. Now you've monitored that network and you're applying your core risk management functions there. You're thinking about your network from a current state to a future state by scanning your network, identifying vulnerabilities. And so very important that we also think about it from the structures that we are going to implement to defend that network, not just the construction or development or architecture. But we also look at it from the penetration testing perspective, where that student will scan the network, carry out the footprinting, fingerprinting, enumeration of their network. They understood what they've developed. Now they understand what those gaps are, how they are able to remediate it. Exploit the network, right? Very important in that they understand the network. They also understand how a threat actor will actually exploit that network to abuse those systems. And of course, we move across the kill chain. And one of the successes that I've had is that students are able to actually move across the kill chain with just 5 tools, right? Nmap, Hydra, MSF Venom, and just a simple tool for a backdoor, right? But it's your metasploitable. And so very interesting that students are able to build out these infrastructure, understanding from a defense and attack perspective, and ultimately, leave our training with that requisite knowledge, not just that test in terms of certification, but demonstrating to an employer, demonstrating to themselves that they can contribute to a cybersecurity environment. And this is where, if you've got any questions, I'll definitely take some of it. But apart from this, we also think about it from the perspective of knowledge, skills, and abilities. But by applying these hands-on labs, these discussions, they also develop the competence, the confidence, and the vocabulary. We think about it, and I like to look at sports. We look at sports, whether it's baseball, whether it's basketball, it's football, whoever our favorite players are. Many of them did not pursue education, but they pursued training, right? We think about it from a sports perspective, and they've got that psychomotor skill. If Stephen Curry gave me the ball and said to shoot, then I'll be motivated, I'll be confident to shoot, but will I score? If he scores, of course, we see what his performances look like because he's been practicing, right? He's got that skill, he's got that ability, he's got the knowledge. The same thing, right? We're looking to apply this same type of knowledge and thinking towards our cybersecurity bootcamp. And this is where it becomes very interesting because, we've got tons of opportunities out there, tons of organizations offering these boot camps, but do they look at it from the perspectives that we've been looking at it? And not to say that our perspectives are the best, but very important, we've applied time, research, and ultimately understanding it from the human perspective. How do we ensure that a professional leaves with positive outcome and that they are a very superior human in the loop in terms of their cyber defense and workflow ability? And so this is where, I'll open the floor for questions. We're thinking from structures to services, critical infrastructure protection. Cyber now, we're looking to create that community of professionals. We see in the news, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in the Caribbean, that infrastructure development is an option to actually lead us out of the pandemic. But when we think about infrastructure protection, we're also thinking of cybersecurity in terms of planning these infrastructure. Because if we do not plan with cybersecurity, what occurs when that infrastructure is in play and delivering services? How do we then protect those services, right? We think about services like we discussed earlier, whether it's your mobile device and telecommunications, whether it's social media. Those are all services that abstract on your critical infrastructure. And so in developing new structures, whether it's in the United States, the Caribbean, Latin America, England, very important that we've got a robust workforce with the abilities to contribute to protecting these services and structures so that we can actually succeed and grow, not just out of the pandemic, but in our future endeavors. At this stage, I'd just like to share with you, we discussed what our approach to that cybersecurity bootcamp would look like, but we've got, whether it's a 12-week intensive course. The 12-week intensive course takes you through several different readings, right? We've got books that we use. In this case, we're going to use one book. In some cases, we use two books. Who practices cybersecurity? General introduction. We go over, the frameworks, much that we identified there in that 5-pillar process. We go over the technical landscape, the challenges, building and starting to build on that infrastructure. We go over using the tools, implementing the tools, installing your Active Directory, your Windows machine, in addition to installing, your hacking devices. We also go over, the technologies that are being used today, websites, databases, wireless, firewalls, routers, VPNs, very important for our communication with our internal work environment in a work from home environment, arrangement. We also go over incident response, and much of which you saw on that diagram. I'll go back to it for discussion when we work into it. We also go over, understanding from the CSF perspective, how do we apply the CSF and its functions, the categories, the subcategories, even crosswalks with other frameworks. We also think about it, in terms of role-based security. How do we provide from permission, the simplest approach, permission-based, read, write, and execute, all the way up into defining an application that's been executing on a system, right? Subjects, objects, access to hardware. A lot of which is also covered in this book, a lot of which students are actually able to practice when implementing these systems. Now, very important, at the end of it, we're synthesizing everything together, where they're looking at their infrastructure, they're hacking their infrastructure, they're mitigating risk within their infrastructure, and ultimately, at the end of it, have a working environment that they can present and share with their employers, or present and share with others, right? Even as they collaborate and grow in the field and pursue other certifications that may require them to use that infrastructure. And so with that, if there are any questions, please go ahead and share in the chat. Yeah, I've seen one. Okay, yeah, very interesting question, Carla. And so, yes, when you think about it from the perspective of the attestation. Yes, you've got the education. That's really good. You've got that rich knowledge. You've got, you've applied academic rigor to your studies and you've been successful. What employers want is an attestation that you've really got the knowledge, skills, and abilities applicable to a specific workflow. If you're going for incident response or penetration tester, they would want to see that you've got that penetration testing certificate, whether it's a CEH, Certified Ethical Hacker, is the OSCP, or the Pen Test Plus from CompTIA. They also want to ensure that, and this is benefit to you also, when you have the knowledge, you want to demonstrate it. You want to reduce that challenge where a recruiter asks you, can you really perform these tasks? And so that, yes, that is a very interesting observation. Now, and this is where, that's why I highlighted to you earlier that because recruiters, and because that's a challenge, especially in the industry in the United States, our approach is ensuring that, yes, students have the abilities to implement. And let me just go back a bit here to what that looks like. That students have the ability to implement these structures. That they're not just reading and discussing and performing these labs, but they're creating something from an input through a process, the curriculum delivery, them building all these structures, them defending it and hacking it. But as an output, the output is them demonstrating that, yes, I've got the skills to pursue certification, but I've also got the skills to demonstrate to a potential employer or even a recruiter to say, listen, I've been studying, I've bridged that gap through self-study by attending a bootcamp, but these are the outputs of that bootcamp. And here it is. And the reason why I say that is that I've got a student who started a job yesterday as a network security engineer. And on Friday, he actually left a job at Applebee's. And when I say that, and I'm very proud of him because he's applied the rich academic rigor, he's performed these actions, and he's demonstrated to his new employer that he has the abilities. And as he mentioned yesterday, he said to me, hey, I'm actually sitting on an infrastructure of over 1,500 virtual machines, virtual and physical machines. The trust that an employer has put in that person, considering where he's come from, not important. He has that knowledge, skills, and abilities. Yeah. To answer your question, yeah, and so yes, it does. I would say, we think about it from that perspective. We also think about it from the perspective of, irrespective of where you seek to apply your knowledge, skills, and abilities, what future career developments you will be looking to accomplish. These are foundational knowledge, applying monitoring, being able to implement them, vulnerability remediation, understanding the bill of materials, understanding what an enterprise looks like, installing a firewall, installing and configuring a router. That's your enterprise wherever you go. Routers, networks, host systems, client machines, vulnerabilities. Those are the structures that you're looking to implement. And so without regard for where you're looking to gain your knowledge, whether it's through cyber vaults, through practicing on hackathons or whatever, you've got that core knowledge to participate and contribute to any team. Any other questions, team? Alrighty. If there are any questions, please feel free to drop them. If not, I'll share my email at the end, and you can reach out to us at 1G Cyber. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, if you're starting into the field, depending on where you're starting from, if you're new to cybersecurity, I would advise you to, if you participate in our event, in our bootcamps, what I do, particularly from a research perspective, is starting off with core network plus server plus. Starting off with courses like the IT risk fundamentals for my side, give you an understanding of the business. When you think about your server plus and network plus, within your security plus, gives you that understanding of the technical structures within which you work in cybersecurity. So you can start off by getting A plus if you're totally new. If you've got some experience, I would suggest server plus, network plus. If you're into on your environment, the technology that's most prevalent there is Linux, you can also pursue a Linux plus certification. Your Security Plus, very foundational certificate for anyone, whether you've got a PhD or otherwise, you must have a at least a Security Plus certification. So that will generally be your most immediate goal. And from there, right, you can pursue specialization, whether you rather administrative cyber or the technical cyber, where you can pursue ISACA courses, or you can pursue, technical courses, whether it's at the GIAC or the CompTIA or the IC Square, wherever, depending on the path that you're looking at. But very foundational. A+, Network Plus, Security Plus. I think those are core certifications that you should pursue at the beginning. And let me just just to demonstrate to you quickly, right here. If you take a look, very important. You've got the beginner, novice. You've got intermediate certificates here, like I mentioned earlier, right? You've got the Network Plus, the Linux Plus. But then, and the approach that we take at CyberBinat is that if you pursue the Security Plus, we include the foundational knowledge for you to pass both the Linux Plus and the Network Plus, in the course that we offer, Network Plus System Administration, which definitely drives Linux. Once you've obtained these certifications, you've got more advanced certs that you can pursue, whether it's the Cybersecurity Analyst, the Pen Test Plus, or you may want to pursue other courses that are not necessarily aligned with CompTIA, right? You've got your IC Squared, you've got your CEH, Certified Ethical Hacker, and of course, the goals generally, you've got your CASP, you've got your CISSPs, your CISMs, depending on, as you move from an associate into mid-level on into directorship. Because again, cybersecurity is a very rewarding field. And so I would encourage you, irrespective of where you're starting, whether it's at beginning, novice, or otherwise, that you seek succession planning for yourself. And beautiful thing is that these certs also support you. As long as you have these certs, you can demonstrate to your employer or new employer, hey, I've got the CASP exam certification. I'd like to pursue a more senior role. I hope I answered your questions there. Any other questions before? Alrighty. If there aren't any other questions, really thank you for participating in today's event. We think about 1G Cyber Digital Opportunity. We're collaborating between the United States, the UK. We've also got collaborations in the Caribbean. Very important. These countries are now pursuing infrastructure. They're now understanding the importance of infrastructure to support economic growth and development, but ultimately developing a cybersecurity workforce that will protect that infrastructure. So irrespective of where you're coming from, there are opportunities out there for you